Hi, I'm Stephanie from Ducky, and today we'll be talking with Sean from Astara Coaching. We both work in the mental health field, and we appreciate opportunities to communicate with other great service providers. So today we thought we would talk about internal and external focuses, and kind of what happens to you on a somatic level when you're living in dual awareness. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means.
Yeah. So that's kind of the first question that I wanted to ask is, when you talk about sort of like stimulus from the inside versus stimulus from the outside, what does that mean?
Yeah, I think we're in a very outward focused society with things like social media. A lot of people don't necessarily check in with themselves before they're already checking in with someone or something else. And as we know from all the studies, that can really affect your baseline of how you interact with the world and of your self concept. So, when I'm talking about dual awareness, it's really being able to differentiate what stimulus is coming from the outside and what stimulus is coming from the inside. So, an example is if you wake up and you're sad because of a memory or something that happened to you, that's an internal stimulus. And that feels, I don't want to say like it's yours, but it feels endogenous. It feels like it's inside you, versus if you wake up and you see something on social media and then that kind of perpetuates a state of sadness. It's a response to an outside stimulus. So just a really simple distinction, and it sounds kind of silly, right? Like, okay, so I'm sad from the inside, I'm sad from the outside, doesn't matter, I'm still sad. But the way that it plays out and the way that you interact with others, I find really matters if you have a greater awareness of where that is coming from.
Yeah, I think that the way that I relate to it is I notice that so many people are so inundated with constant stimuli that they have no awareness of their own internal state. And in your sort of from the sort of somatic perspective, I think that on the most like basic level, this even plays out with things like just like what people eat and put in their body.
Mhm.
That or when you eat something, so for instance, for me, it was dairy when I was younger. I was constantly sick when I was younger because I had a dairy allergy, and it would like, make I would give me like postnasal drip, and then I would get like ears, nose, throat infection, and I would get that over and over and over again. And I was just like ignoring the signals from my body telling me that. And then when I stopped eating dairy, that just sort of went away. And so I think that this idea of like paying attention to I guess the way that I see it, and I'm curious how you feel about it. I feel like right now we are sort of lopsided in that, like as a society, that we focus much more on the external stimulus than we do on the internal.
I would agree. And I'd go a step further and say that that's by design. So I think once we start doing the work of differentiating and we kind of come to that realization, for a lot of us that the outside stimulus is really dominating our ability to find our internal set point, because there's just so much stuff we have to wade through before we can even get to, wait, how am I feeling today without all this other stuff? And yeah, it can manifest in really funny ways. A personal story is I never really realized how externally focused I was until I got a dog. So when I was a kid, I was the one that was always running around to everyone else's house and doing all these other things in their world. So I would always I was an immigrant, so it was easy for me to do, right? I would always kind of immigrate to my friends' houses, go to other places, be the odd one out, and kind of feel comfortable with it. And then I got a dog and I wanted to be home and I wanted my friends to come, to my house and live in my world for a little bit. And it was so much more challenging for them because they were used to being in their own environment all the time. And so I think we have these predispositions and we're not aware of them. And the more we work to really kind of familiarize ourselves with our native language, and that can be, obviously nonverbal physical cues as well, the more we're able to translate that and communicate with others.
Yeah, the by design part for sure. I mean, companies are we live in an attention economy, and companies are spending millions, billions, trillions of dollars to figure out how to capture our attention and keep it.
Yeah, well, if you've done any of the kind of manifestation or mindfulness work, energy flows where your attention goes. So they know that. They're not just doing this because they want more airtime or they want to have an advertising budget. They're doing it because they know that our attention is valuable.
Right.
And it kind of sucks that we're only finding out that our attention is valuable because we're seeing how it's getting misused.
Totally.
And I mean, that's for me, I think re-indigenization is something that I'm very pro. And I mean, there's so many different ways that that can manifest, but one of the ways is by really taking responsibility for your energy and attention, attuning to yourself, attuning to the world around you, which for thousands of millions of years was nature, not billboards, not traffic, not TikTok. It was actually noticing your surroundings in a way that was deeply and inherently connected to your survival.
And you used a term re-indigenization. What is that?
Mhm. So, indigenous communities, right, are the native people of whatever land. And to me, indigenous doesn't mean an ethnic group or a minority. It means the familiarity and the connectedness to your environment. Re-indigenization, yes, it is political and it is tied to land back and other movements about kind of restoring land, goods, services to indigenous nations. But in the way that I'm using it, it's more about really just refamiliarizing yourself with where you're from. So that's kind of that key in my company's idea, brand idea came from, was this idea that it has to come from here. It has to be indigenous, endogenous. Endogenous means, within the body. And it just, everything makes more sense when you know or have a sense of connection to where it's coming from.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I think that a lot of the work that I do with people is about connecting them back to. There's lots of different words for it. I think a common one that I use is like connecting them back to their compass. Like just connecting
Mm-hmm.
them back to the sort of quiet voice inside of them, their like intuition that sort of drives them in one direction or another. And I'm really it's cool to hear you talk about, because it sounds like a part of that for you and like sort of in your practice, reconnecting with almost like your natural environment. How do you do that?
Well, again, with the internal and external stimuli, right? Differentiating if that idea or that impulse comes from within you or it something that's been planted or suggested. So I went through a really kind of deep healing at the end of a relationship. Several years ago, I had been in that relationship for a decade. And so when that relationship ended, it was a huge kind of change and identity shift. And I really was trying hard to differentiate, am I feeling this way because of what happened, or am I feeling this way because of what I already have kind of in me that's reacting to this outside stimulus? And so now that I like opened myself up to being willing to do these things and to not kind of follow the patterns that I had lived in for the past 10 years, I started getting really interesting urges to do things that I felt were not me or were not who I was. All of a sudden, I took up an interest in archery. And I had never really been like outdoorsy. I had never hunted. I'd never been into that stuff. And I just wanted to be outside and I wanted to be like on the land. I wanted to sit down. I wanted to feel a tree at my back. I had all these like very intense urges of refamiliarizing myself with what I didn't know was a very valid and present part of me that I had just never listened to, because that voice, that internal voice, can be really quiet. And the external stimulus can be so loud that sometimes it takes trauma or, something really, I call it a pattern interrupt, something really big that kind of changes your normal pattern. And we see this in studies all the time. They suggest to take a different route to work or brush your teeth with your non-dominant hand to kind of interrupt the pattern of doing things on autopilot.
Yeah. My version of this is like breaking the codes that like we have like scripts that we run,
Mm-hmm.
and they just automatically run. And some of those scripts are really useful, like getting up and having breakfast, or like whatever. I can't think of a good example right now, but whatever script it is that you're trying to do, some of them can be really useful, but a lot of them end up becoming like maladaptive. They stop serving us and end up hurting us. And so
Yeah.
there were a couple of different things that I heard in terms of like how you sort of reconnect to your native environment. One is just the questioning itself of like, is this internal or external? And the second is this idea of like pattern interrupts, big or small.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one thing that was really interesting as you were talking about the questioning of internal or external, it kind of seems like it is all simultaneously both.
Yeah.
You know?
No, and that can be a trap to get stuck in the, is it internal, is it external? So I definitely want to acknowledge that, and I'm grateful that you brought it up. The differentiation is only important if it helps you connect to, that endogenous voice, that inner compass. If it's just causing you to kind of dissociate or ruminate even more on kind of the state of things, then it's taking you kind of further away from the goal, for sure.
Sure, yeah. And I wasn't even thinking about that. I was just thinking like, I think my mind just enjoys tinkering with a concept. And so this idea of like internal external, the reason I said it's always simultaneously both is like, so you use the example of like you wake up in the morning and you have a memory. Like that memory was originally an external stimulus
Mm-hmm.
that got internalized, and now it's like this internal reaction that you have. And at the same time, even at the moment when that memory was happening, like even at the moment when that actual event was happening, there was a whole like internal world happening for you.
That dictates how you remember that memory.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And so I would say one of the number one things that I do in my work is just pointing out to people. So, like, a really common example is like, I really want to be able to, like, fold and hang my laundry. There's always just like laundry all over the place. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, do you actually want to do that? Or do you just feel like you should do that because of all the external stimulus?
Yep.
And 99% of the time, it's like, yeah, I don't actually really care. And it's like, okay, great, then let's not do that.
And there are so many workarounds to those things, right? Like, I think we all, as like the culture shifts a little bit more, we're all way more fluent in neurodivergence and different ways that it can kind of, manifest. I don't like folding my laundry as much as anybody else, but I have like a laundry basket that's just for clean stuff. Because there are times where I feel really productive and really like excited to put things away. But if I don't know where my clean laundry is, or if it's shoved out of the way, then I won't do it. But if it's in its like designated place, then I actually get excited to like clear that. So there are so many workarounds and different ways to do that. And I think a lot of this differentiation is really like that example that you gave. Like, is this something that you really want to do? Is this desire to have this, laundry zero inbox internal, or is it a pressure, an external pressure that you feel you need to show up to and maintain?
Totally. Yeah. I love the way that these more sort of like esoteric topics so quickly reduce down to like very pragmatic stuff
Yeah.
that, we're talking about like internal and external stimulus and blah, 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 blah. But then like what it reduces down to is like, dude, like maybe you just need a laundry basket for your clean laundry. And that would solve your
Laundry
problems.
baskets don't just have to be for dirty laundry.
Right.
PSA.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really cool. One of the other things that I'd noted as we were talking that I wanted to circle back to is what a heckin' amazing gift your dog was to you. that
Oh, absolutely.
your dog was such a an amazing way to, I don't know, I guess the way that I translate it, let me know if this isn't fair, is that there was a certain amount of like self-abandonment that was happening in like
1000%.
just going, you know, always being the one to sacrifice and go over to other people's houses, always being out of your native environment. And your dog was like, but I want you here. And so then it was like, oh, well, friends come over. And then
Yeah.
it brought you back to you.
Yeah. He was an anchor in the best way possible. And I agree. There was definitely a lot of self judgment and just wanting to make things easier for other people because my home environment my home environment wasn't easy for me, and I kind of knew the rules. So, and there was a language barrier. I mean, there were so many things that I think I was trying to protect my friends from, and more so protect my social alliances, right? From being like at the whim of what my home environment was. So, because my dog was such this like joyful, uncomplicated, you know, bonus, plus, 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 only positives. Yeah, he helped change that dynamic for me. And then for me to understand too, like, I can only get so close to these people in their own environment because I'm always just going to be an add on. If it's not more balanced, if they don't actually know where I come from, where my, kind of training ground is, then we won't be able to really connect. And the one friend who I felt comfortable bringing into my world is the one that I'm still in touch with now because there's like fluidity. It's a figure eight relationship, right? Like I put into it, but I also get out from it. Whereas a lot of my other relationships, especially in childhood, I was really trying to like give everything away.
Yeah, it's cool as we talk about it how much I realize that like most things, it connects to everything else because what you talked about with your friend, I think is such a common sort of journey that I see people go on, which is
Yeah.
that they'll have the conversation with me about like, oh, I feel obligated to go over to my grandma's house or whatever, but I don't really want to go over to my grandma's house. And it's like, okay, why don't you want to go over to your grandma's house? And then we get into that, and it's like, okay, so in my mind, there's sort of two options here. Either you can continue to force yourself to go over to your grandma's house, in which case you're gonna like resent your grandma and just continue to like the resentment is just gonna grow. Or you can like actually listen to that internal signal and try to address that with your grandma so that you can like repair that relationship so that you can actually want to go over and spend time with your grandma. And so yeah, like the just the idea that by tuning into your internal signals, not only can it help you, you know, like do your laundry, it can also help to like improve your relationships. It's just it's so like wide sweeping.
Yeah. Yeah. And it can open you up to new experiences. It can allow you to invest yourself into something that you maybe don't know that you have an affinity with.
Like archery.
And I'm sure in your like archery, I'm sure in your example, that grandma wants grandchild that wants to come see them.
Right.
Like that's the whole purpose for the visit is I want them to want
Totally. Yeah.
this
Like
relationship.
if you went over to someone's house and you were like, "Hey, I'm only here because I feel obligated." They'd be like, "Then go away. I don't want to I don't want you around. What the fuck?"
Well, and that's a problem, right, with like intergenerational work is a lot of times it's been passed down to them and they've had to swallow their own internal
Mm,
voice and do what was expected of them. And so now they feel like it's their turn.
totally. Yeah,
Um,
especially you were talking about immigrating and I see that tenfold in the sort of
mhm.
like the people that I've worked with that have immigrated to the US. There is this narrative of like, well, I sacrificed everything for you, so now you owe me.
Oh, the shame and blame narrative is part of the immigrant experience and it's like inextractable. You can't separate the two.
It's brutal. It is such a deeply ingrained piece. Like there's all sorts of things during the sort of like healing process that are sort of like getting de-integrated, but boy
Mhm.
is that a tight knot, you know?
I think it's because it is part of that indigenous inner voice, like who you are and where you're from, what you're made of, and the culture and traditions that you grew up with. They are, like you said, internal and external. And so for for us immigrant kids, we kind of sometimes feel like we don't belong in either. You know, we don't belong fully in American culture. We're too different. We don't belong fully in our native culture because we're too American. And it kind of is a mechanism of self-abandonment that gets coded into how you behave. It's why it was so easy for me to, leave my house and go to other people's houses, because I already felt like that expectation was built in. But luckily, I had Max to come into my life, my dog, and make me re-examine. Is that really coded that way, or is that something that I'm choosing to reinforce every single time?
Yeah. It's amazing the things that end up making such huge impacts. Yeah, that like this deeply ingrained, you know, like generational stuff just took Max being like awesome.
Yeah.
Well,
Do
cool.
you have any kind of examples or ways in which the internal and external kind of stimulus kind of showed up for you?
Oh, well, okay. I think that like a big part of my like Batman origin story is that I was going to school. So when I was growing up, I always hated school in general, and not because I was bad at it. The opposite, actually. Like I got great grades. It was just boring for me. It felt like a waste of time. But my parents always really stressed how important school was, and
And
including
you weren't even from an immigrant family.
no,
Because
uh,
that's a huge thing for us.
totally, yeah, and that included college. That my parents would talk about how, you know, the world is a real hard, scary place, and college sort of gives you an edge. And if you don't go to college, then the world is an even harder, scarier place. And so I was like,
Yeah.
well, I guess I gotta go to college. And so I, you know, grew up hating school, forced myself to go to college, and I was going to college to study something that I was passionate about. I was going to college to study theatrical directing. I started to hate theater
Mhm.
in going there. And I was like, this cannot be right. I have always loved theater. My entire life, I've loved theater. If I am doing something that is making me hate something that I love, it has to be wrong for me.
Yeah.
um, that was terrifying because like everyone that I trusted in my life was telling me like this is the right thing, the thing that you're supposed to do, all of this external stimulus, and my internal stimulus was like this is absolutely wrong, this is absolutely incorrect. And what allowed me to get out of it was years before I was having a lot of trouble job hunting, and I was playing a whole lot of a video game called Hearthstone, which is like a collectible card game. And my mom said something, it wasn't like judgmental, it was just sort of like a thought that occurred to her. She said, you know, if people would spend the same amount of time that they do on video games, if people were like as tenacious in their lives as they are about video games, they would be enormously successful. And that stuck with me, and I thought about it. And so when I was having this crisis of like, oh God, internal, external stimulus, what do I do? I wrote my parents and I was like, you know, mom, I thought a lot about what you said. And if I am going to live my life the way that I play a game, I need permission to fail, because that is what allows me to play a game that way, is that I know
Mhm.
if I lose, I can just, you know, go next.
Yeah.
All the stakes are removed. And so I need that permission. Fortunately, my parents were amenable to that. And so that then allowed me to leave school, and you know the rest is sort of history, and I've absolutely never regretted it. I'm so grateful that I made that decision, that I'm where I am now.
That's such an awesome story.
Thanks.
And it's really cool to hear you say, either my internal voice is way off or what they're telling me is way off, but something's got to give. I think a lot of us get to that point, and because of socialization, shame and blame, pressure, just fatigue, honestly, sometimes of being in that will I, won't I, we just go, well, I guess I must be wrong then, and they must be right.
Yeah, and I mean, for years that was it. For because I've forced myself through school for years, and I knew that it wasn't right for me. And then eventually, it really was the fatigue, I think, because I'd always been able to like I'm very proud of my body's ability, my body and mind's ability to adapt. So like it will rise to whatever occasion it is put in, and it stopped being able to do that. Like I could do the assignments, but my willpower was out. Like I was capable, but I just could. It was like I can't force myself to do this anymore.
Yeah.
And at that point, I was like, I gotta get out of here.
Yeah. And the body knows, like, it's deeper than, I mean, I know a lot of people reference, the body knows the score, and the body being kind of a register for trauma. But deeper than that, it knows, and it is trying desperately to communicate with you in
Yeah,
the only way that it knows how. And so, you have this very strong relationship to your body and mind's ability and capacity to adapt. When that goes away, or it starts to change in a way that's, noticeable, that's your body being like, hey, buddy, listen, something's way off,
yeah,
way off.
yeah,
And a lot of people don't, because of the external stimulus of, oh, well, if you're low in energy, take the supplement. Or if you're, struggling with this, then you just need to hit the gym harder. We have this very extractive way of communicating with the body. And so not only is it important to differentiate internal and external, but then, what is the condition of how you respond when that internal register, when that internal voice is opposing the external narrative.
yeah. I mean, that feels like a beautiful sort of like cherry on top of this conversation. Is there anything else that you want to like add or throw in there before we sort of wrap up?
No, I mean, I think this was great. I think we covered a lot of ground, and it is. It's like this is the entry into the hero's journey, right? Like
Mm,
this is the beginning of the beginning, and the more that you have that fluency with the tools that you have at your disposal, the more that you can communicate with your body, the more that you can integrate with nature. In my experience, the more fun and the easier that hero's journey becomes.
totally. Well said. Well said. Well, thank you so much, Stephanie. I really appreciate the conversation.
Yeah, that was wonderful. Thank you.